This is always the best part, seeing them go back together. Got some overspray on it. I didn't know I was doing that. That's a little disappointing. Masking tape did not hold up very well. It's got some oozing.
The masking tape don't hold up well.
That's disappointing, but it doesn't affect the performance. Now here, this is bent a little. We need to straighten those. And somewhere the case has there. This corner here, we've got a crease running down that way. So whatever hit this and bent the legs really clobbered the table as well. But that's all right. That's going to be okay. Just going to get the wood mallet out, smack it, straighten it back out.
Dad.
You can see how painting the inside of it white, or cream I guess in this point, is going to dramatically lighten up the table itself. We're going to start by reassembling the saw carriage. The rear of the saw is the one with the chip breaker mount, or splitter mount. So this is the front. And that is the carriage pivot lock. Now this rear lock here is the one that had the nylon on it. And to be honest, it needs another washer. Something to take up the pressure on the nylon when the spring bears on it. So I'm going to go track down another washer downstairs so that I know this one doesn't break. Alright, so with that washer sourced, the rear one can go on. This pivot here, you'll eventually need to set the tension on. Right now, I've just got it as tight as I can get it by finger. And that's probably not enough. When I took it apart, I made the same mistake. This pivot has to be off in order to get the blade raise and tilt mechanism through. So, once again, I had to take it back. Here, you have got these two O-rings. Between those two O-rings, because they seal, you want a little bit of light gray grease. And it's okay in here.
That's gotta be a piece of rock for Mommy.
Because those, and this is just generic axle grease, because those two O-rings are going to seal and keep the sawdust out. Now, this has some shims, which are very fine washers to help take up the slack behind the E-clips, and then a spring washer which applies tension. Shoot. Because I have painted it, they don't want to go on. And then an E-clip. Did you burp, bud? Now, because this thing had a mangled shim, what I have done is found a washer whose thickness is equal to this small shim and the mangled shim combined, so that when they're both on there, in place of this, it takes up all of the slot in this screwdriver. Now this one can come on. Nice. Oh, that's already much better. What I don't like is that this shim right here, it clearly needs just a little more. In this case, their E-clip is also a spring washer. So what I've done is flipped it around. And by flipping it around, I can apply a little more pressure on this whole unit. So now that is ready to go back in the saw. Okay, before we bolt the carriage assembly to the top, we need to protect it. And I've always just done that with paste wax. So let me get a rag here, and I'll wipe it on nice and thick. You're going to need a couple of coats probably to start with. Same way you're waxing a car. You wipe it on, you let it get hazy, you buff it out. You just do a couple of coats just in case you miss parts. When it comes to reassembling, it's very simple to keep it straight. The long span of the table is the front. The short span is the rear, and if you still have your splitter mounting point, that's going to hang out the back. There's no point in torquing this down. We just want to get the bolts in it right now. Now to put the base on. The astute among you will notice that I have flipped this bar around. I had it going the wrong way. I've also had the whole thing back together once and back apart because I forgot that piece, which of course is the tilt keeper. You don't want to forget that piece, or you'll be doing it again, like I just did. Once you get it down in, you can just screw the tilt mechanism back out through the hole. Don't forget to grease it or wax it before you do so. Here's what the unit looks like when things start to go back together. Nothing is tight, but this has been greased. All the tilt is back together. All the tilt drive screws, they have been waxed. I would, by the way, advise maybe a little bit of dry silicone spray on all of these. But everything looks like it's lining up properly. I still don't care for the fact that it only has one bolt there and two bolts here. Which makes me wonder if this base maybe fits a different saw, or who knows, a couple of different saws. But now what I need to do is I need to get this attached back to the table because it's easiest to align when the saw is upright. At least I find it to be much easier to align when the saw is upright. So I'm going to go ahead and get that bolted in, these two bolted in. These are just snug right now. And the clamps are just snug. In fact, that one over there isn't bolted in at all because the lock bolt comes through that hole right there. So there's not a lot to see here. I'm going to get these two bolts in place. That bolt, get that bolted in. We're going to flip it over. Oh, we still got to fix these.
What happened?
Well, the handles don't swivel very well. So we're going to take them apart and we're going to make them swivel.
You're gonna make them swivel?
Yep. Let's do that right now. It's not really crucial for the project because almost certainly your wheels will be different. But basically what's wrong with these is they're super, super cheap and badly machined. So they twist and they jam. All I'm doing is polishing off the unevenness here and then re-rounding this portion so it's a little more comfortable and a little lubrication. And they are going to work beautifully. And I can already tell we have had a tremendous amount of success. Now granted, the trunnions have not been bolted into place. But already, this was a saw that it took 2 hands to tip. You might remember seeing me do that when I first took it apart. And now look at us. One-handed, it's not bolted down. It's wiggling on the table, but you can see it's much better. Please pardon my little hammer. I'm getting ready to start aligning the side of the table, and so I put this blade on. Look at that. I hope it's not in the arbor. I hope it's this. This is a DeWalt, but it's loose enough on the arbor that I can actually make it make noise. That's not a good sign. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily mean the blade will wobble side to side, but it'll always be going out around. Well,
You messed up my scuba!
there is no way I'm using that blade to align the saw. I'll have to go dig through my stack and find another one. It really doesn't matter which blade you use. To be honest, I could use that one just fine. But let's start out with a fitting. I located a blade. It's an old Trader blade. Not that that matters. It's got very little kerf, which is nice for me, and it's a solid disc. You want to try to make sure that you don't see side-to-side wobble. And there's nothing here. But that doesn't matter either. Because what you're going to do is pick a spot on the blade, and it doesn't matter where that spot is, but right there. Every measurement we take will be taken from that spot, right there. Whether it's here, or here, top, underneath, everything is measured from that point. So that point will always remain consistent, even if there's an inconsistency in the saw blade itself. First thing you want to do, run your saw up, high as it'll go, and square it. You want to get your blade perfectly perpendicular. This, like most craftsmen, will go a little past straight up and down. Now there are stops underneath you can adjust to stop it so that it hits straight up and down. But to be honest, you get a little sawdust in there. Those aren't any good anyways. And next thing you know, your saw blade will be tipped farther and farther and farther. So usually I leave them. And I just keep a square. Even on my good General, I just keep a square. So I'm going to get her straight up and down. You got to take this steel and go in between the saw kerf. Or on this blade, you've got a tooth that cuts straight, a tooth that cuts right, and a tooth that cuts left. So I am putting it right here. Oops. All that comes off our spot. I am putting it right here on the tooth that leans away from my angle. And you want to sight along the blade so that you have no gap all the way along one edge. That is now 90 degrees to the tabletop. Lock it in place. I take that back. Don't lock it in place. This Craftsman saw has no way to lock up and down. And you don't want to torque the end trunnion there because you haven't yet squared it to the saw itself. So in this case, don't. If you have a separate tilt lock, other than your up-down lock, like for instance this General locks each one separately, then you can lock up and down. This saw only locks tilt, up and down is just let fly. So, I'm just going to leave it. What are you doing over there? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You're all right. For this process, I recommend a good steel ruler. In fact, this isn't one. I'm talking one of those business rulers or a drafting ruler. And you're going to tip and measure from your spot. In this case, I'm holding it back from the teeth, square against the blade. You don't want to push because you don't want to flex the blade. You just want to touch it. And you want to take a measurement. And I'm using the millimeter side because that will allow me. That does not help, actually. You'd be surprised. Doing this with a 4-year-old can affect your accuracy. I recommend taking your measurement off of the way for the miter gauge because usually those are milled, well, in theory, it's milled perfectly square. And I'm going to use the millimeter side because it's going to give me a little more accurate results with this ruler. So I'm looking at 103 millimeters. Spin it around. Same thing over here. Up against your blade. And check. And I am 102 millimeters. So, my saw needs to tip. It's not rocket science. Back to my position. I am 102 and a half. Just under 102 and a half. No, we went back. We went back where we were before. Let's see. Let's try this again. There's 102. We keep going back to those spots. Yep. Not right now, bud. Daddy's got to do some aligning. Can you say aligning? All right, now what do we got? Ooh. 103 and a half. Look at that. We are almost there. Let me double check. It's not a teeter-totter because both ends can move independent of each other. This can get a little cranky. I believe we're there, buddy boy.
What?
I believe we got her adjusted. We'll just call that 103.
Dad, we think we're there, Daddy. We're there, Daddy.
No, where's my hammer? Hammers. Thank you. $104. $104. Now I've got them both set. In my case, it's 104 millimeters. I'm going to snug up the rear. Not super hard because I still need to maybe move things. Once I snug them up, I'll check it again. If they still agree with each other, I will snug the front. If they agree with each other after that, I'll crank them down, test them one last time, and we should be good to go. And that's how you square a table saw blade. Here's an important alignment tip. A pro save you from burning up belt like I did the first time. Here's your pulley. Okay? You need your pulley to be in far enough that the edge of the pulley clears this web in the table. Doesn't have to clear by much. It just has to clear. That way, when the saw blade is all the way up, there is room right here for that belt between the pulley and the saw top. If you have your pulley over too far, then the ridge of the pulley will be cutting into your table saw. It won't really matter that much. Well, I guess it could spark, cause a fire, and if you're really reef on it, it could cause problems. But to be honest, it won't really matter that much. The big deal is you'll lose a ½ inch of travel, and that can be really important. So, at least on the Craftsman, but really on most saws I've seen, there's a little pocket up here, and you need to align this so that it fits in that pocket. In order to adjust the angle indicator, I just reinstall it. You make sure your blade is perpendicular with your square first, locked in place, and then I just install it here and bend it. You know, it's not a rocket science tool, and it's not very accurate. It's better than guessing, but not by a whole lot. So right now, saw blade's perfect. It's perfect. That said, after you use the saw for 15-20 minutes and it's vibrated, it's anybody's guess. Still be close, but you know, you can just bend it easy enough. Now we're going to lock this whole mechanism in place like that. We're going to recheck that our blade is still straight in the saw, that our carriage didn't move when locked down, and she's done. The hard part is over.